There is a peculiar truth about pain. It does not exist merely in the moment. It is born. Pain, especially that which arises in the crucible of our early years, becomes a companion, silent, persistent, and often disguised. It walks beside us long after we believe it is gone. Most people try to forget. They distract themselves with the noise of the world, drown the echo of old wounds in ambition, addiction, or busyness. But what is repressed is not erased. What is unacknowledged does not die. It waits. The integration of the shadow is essential for healing. This idea suggests that those aspects of ourselves which we repress, deny, or disown, especially those that are linked to painful, shameful, or traumatic experiences, continue to live within us, silently influencing our actions, thoughts, and emotions. These parts of the psyche are not eliminated by avoidance or repression. They are simply buried in the unconscious, where they continue to operate often in destructive or compulsive ways. When a person experiences pain, particularly in early life or through emotionally intense events, the psyche often seeks to protect itself by splitting off the intolerable experiences, storing them away in a hidden compartment of the mind. But what is split off is not gone. It remains and it seeks expression, recognition, and resolution. The shadow, as a psychological concept, represents the totality of these hidden, repressed, and often negatively judged parts of the self. These are not only the clearly destructive traits like rage, envy, or cruelty, but also vulnerability, fear, weakness, or even undeveloped potential that never had space to be expressed. In the personal unconscious, the shadow includes all that a person refuses to identify with, yet which still belongs to them. The more an individual avoids or denies this content, the more powerful it becomes, gaining autonomy over their behavior and subtly directing their life. The painful memories we carry are often bound up in the shadow because they are difficult to integrate into the conscious image we hold of ourselves. If we think of ourselves as strong, competent, kind, or loving, then any experience that contradicts that identity may be exiled into the unconscious, yet that exile does not dissolve its impact. Many people unknowingly leave out their uninterpreted pain. They are triggered by situations that resemble their original wound. They overreact, misplace anger, or collapse emotionally. They may find themselves repeating toxic patterns in relationships or self-sabotaging in moments of growth. All of this occurs because the disowned parts of themselves are trying to find a way back in. The unconscious always seeks wholeness. It does not tolerate exclusion indefinitely. Pain that is denied becomes internal pressure. The longer it is avoided, the more urgently it seeks expression through dreams, projections, emotional disturbances, or even physical symptoms. The path to healing is not in suppression but in confrontation. Yet this confrontation must not be violent or judgmental. It must be done with attention, with compassion, and with the courage to see oneself not as one wishes to be, but as one truly is. The shadow must be approached, not as an enemy to be conquered, but as a lost part of the self that longs to be seen and included. The painful memories of the past often contain these lost fragments of innocence, of trust, of power, of love. They were buried not because they were worthless, but because they were too much to bear at the time they were formed. The inner child who felt betrayed, the adolescent who felt invisible, the adult who was humiliated or abandoned, these are not ghosts to be exorcised. They are living parts of the psyche frozen in time. To heal is to unfreeze them, to reclaim them, to allow them to speak. When a person turns toward their shadow, they often encounter resistance. The ego, which has spent years building an identity around what is acceptable or admirable, will resist anything that threatens to disrupt the stability. But transformation requires disturbance. What is unconscious must rise to the surface. and the surface will tremble. The one who dares to descend into the inner darkness must be willing to suffer temporarily to feel again what was once unbearable. But this time they enter it in a new capacity, with adult consciousness, with the ability to witness rather than be consumed. By integrating the shadow, a person becomes whole. They cease to be at war with themselves. They recognize the parts of themselves that once seemed dangerous or alien. They see that what they feared was not inherently bad, but simply misunderstood or unacknowledged. The painful memories lose their charge because they are no longer avoided. They are metabolized, digested by the psyche, and become part of the person's story, not as a weight, but as a foundation. The one who integrates their shadow gains depth, authenticity, and resilience. They no longer project their wounds onto others. They no longer need to pretend. They become real. This process is not a single moment of realization, but a continual unfolding. The shadow is not a static object. It shifts as we grow, revealing new layers, but each integration makes the next one more possible. A person who has faced their pain once is more equipped to face it again. And in doing so, they develop what can only be called soul, a depth of being that comes from having walked through fire and emerged not untouched but transformed. There is a sacredness in reclaiming what was lost. The pain, once integrated, becomes a source of power. The shame, once exposed, loses its sting. The fear, once faced, reveals its origin and its lesson. What remains is not a perfect person, but a whole one. Someone who contains contradictions, who has known suffering, and who no longer runs from themselves. Such a person does not need to dominate others, nor shrink in their presence. They carry within them a quiet strength, born not of denial, but of acceptance. They do not need the world to validate them because they have recovered the parts of themselves that the world once rejected. When the shadow is integrated and the pain no longer feared, a kind of internal peace arises, not the peace of ignorance, but the peace of understanding. The person who has embraced their own darkness is less likely to be disturbed by the darkness of others. They become more compassionate, less reactive, more grounded. The healing of painful memories is not forgetting what happened. It is remembering with new eyes, with the eyes of a self that has reclaimed its lost pieces and learned to carry them with dignity. Painful memories are not the end of the story. They are the beginning of the descent. And the descent, though difficult, is the path to integration. The shadow is not the enemy of light, but its complement. In the union of opposites, true healing is found. Conscious confrontation with the memory transforms its power. This means that the emotional and psychological weight of a painful memory does not inherently reside in the event itself, but in our relationship to it. What we remember, especially what has wounded us deeply, often carries a charge, not because it happened, but because we continue to avoid facing it. Memory, particularly traumatic or shame-filled memory, tends to stay frozen in time, emotionally raw, unprocessed, and disconnected from the broader context of our life story. Avoidance only deepens the split between who we are now and the part of us that still lives in that moment. The psyche holds on, not because it wants to suffer, but because it demands completion. The inner wound, unacknowledged, becomes a knot in the unconscious that tugs at our emotions, thoughts, and behavior patterns. Every time we suppress or look away from it, we reinforce its mystery, giving it more power over our present. Confrontation, in this sense, is not about reliving the event with the same helplessness or re-traumatization. It is about bringing conscious awareness to what has remained unexamined. Consciousness has a transformative quality. It clarifies, integrates, and softens the grip of unconscious forces. When we consciously revisit a painful memory, we are not returning as the same version of ourselves who lived it. We return with the presence of who we are now, with a wider field of awareness, insight, and emotional resources. We return with the capacity to observe, to interpret, and to feel in a new way. The act of turning toward the memory rather than away from it interrupts the cycle of unconscious repetition. It creates space between the past and the present, allowing reflection instead of reaction. Painful memories tend to form emotional imprints that continue to echo through our relationships and inner dialogue. They show up in our overreactions, our fears, our inexplicable sadness or anxiety. What we haven't faced consciously, we are doomed to repeat in one form or another, often projected outward onto others. This is not because the psyche is cruel, but because it is attempting to get our attention. When we consciously confront the memory, we are saying to ourselves, I am ready to see, I am ready to feel what I have buried. I am ready to make peace with what has been haunting me. This act of confrontation must be done with deep care. Rushing into memory without containment or support can reopen wounds, but done with patience and compassion, the process becomes deeply healing. As we sit with the memory, details may emerge that were long forgotten. Facial expressions, sounds, textures, or subtle emotional tones. These elements often carry meaning that was too overwhelming to process at the time of the original experience. With conscious attention, we begin to see that the memory is not just pain, but a story that needs to be heard, honored, and given context. The emotions that rise up during this process, grief, anger, confusion, even guilt, are not regressions. They are signals that we are entering into emotional territory that needs release and integration. By allowing ourselves to feel these emotions fully without resistance or judgment, we begin to reclaim energy that was locked away in the memory. What was once a closed, silent wound becomes a dialogue. And as we speak, or even silently bear witness to what arises, we begin to take back authorship of our inner life. We shift from being a passive recipient of memory to an active participant in its meaning. This act alone can reduce the power the memory holds. It may not erase it, but it transforms our orientation to it. Instead of being a source of fear or shame, it becomes a chapter of a larger narrative, a story of survival, of growth, of awakening. The transformation also comes from understanding the deeper layers of the memory. Often, what caused the pain was not just the external event, but the internal belief it generated. A child who was ignored may have concluded they are unworthy of love. An adolescent who was ridiculed may have come to believe they must hide their true self. These beliefs, forged in moments of vulnerability, become internal truths that shape adult identity. Conscious confrontation allows us to revisit those conclusions and challenge them. We begin to separate what happened from what we came to believe about ourselves. Because of it, that separation is vital. It allows us to update our inner narrative. It opens the door to forgiveness, not necessarily of others, but of ourselves, for carrying burdens that were never truly ours to bear. In this way, confronting the memory becomes an act of self-liberation. We cease to be defined by wounds. We begin to see the memory as part of us, but not the whole of us. The transformation is not always immediate. Some memories must be visited many times, each time peeling back a new layer of meaning or emotion. But even a single conscious encounter can begin to loosen the memory's grip. Over time. The rawness fades. What was once a source of shame becomes a source of insight. What was once hidden becomes a source of empathy for oneself and for others. This process also deepens one's psychological maturity. We stop projecting blame outward. We take responsibility for our healing. We recognize that while we may not have been able to control the original wound, we now have the power to change how it lives within us. We recognize the inner child or younger self not as something to be fixed, but as someone who still needs care and attention. We begin to parent that part of ourselves. We offer it safety, recognition, and love. This internal relationship becomes the foundation of true healing. As the memory loses its unconscious charge, it also loses its compulsive influence. We find ourselves less reactive, more present, more open. Relationships improve because we are no longer seeking to resolve old pain through others. We stop demanding that the world compensate for what we haven't faced. The energy we once used to keep the memory buried becomes available for creativity, connection, and purpose. We begin to feel more whole, not because the past is changed, but because it has been integrated. The memory becomes something we carry, not something that carries us. Conscious confrontation is not about perfection. It is about presence. It is about presence. It is about returning again and again to what hurts with a willingness to see, to feel, and to understand. It is about choosing not to look away. It is about becoming intimate with the truth of one's own story. Through that intimacy, the pain softens, the sharp edges dull. The memory no longer dictates who we are or how we love. It becomes a thread in the fabric of our being, a reminder of where we've been, and a testament to how far we've come. The pain of the past does not heal through denial, distraction, or the passage of time alone. It heals through the brave and conscious act of turning inward, of facing what once overwhelmed us and reclaiming what was left behind in the process. When we dare to confront the memories we've buried, not to change them, but to understand them, we loosen their grip on our present. And when we welcome the shadow we've exiled, we begin to move toward true wholeness. Healing is not about becoming someone new. It is about recovering the parts of ourselves we once had to forget. In doing so, we transform our suffering into meaning, our wounds into wisdom, and our past into a foundation we can finally stand on with strength, peace, and dignity. Thank you for walking this path with presence, courage, and an open heart. May you find the strength to look within, the patience to sit with what arises, and the grace to reclaim all that you are. Good luck on your journey of healing and integration. Your past does not define you, but how you choose to meet it will.